This week, we're going to be talking about where people's commonly held beliefs about sexuality and gender come from. And we're going to start by talking about the powerful concepts of normal, norms, and normativity. What does it mean to be normal? We associate normal with things that are familiar, things that are within our own lived experience, and that are represented by those social forces in our lives that I talked about in lecture last week. Schools, media, government, law, family, religion. What is represented as normal by those institutions, those social forces in our lives, are often what we also believe to be normal. Importantly, our ideas about what's normal are based in the cultural context in which we live and were raised, and the people around us have lived and were raised. It's often helpful to think about what's normal for us, not in terms of gender and sexuality, which are complicated and personal identity topics, but in relation to the foods that we enjoy eating. Particularly if you spent a lot of time living outside the US, or you have parents or grandparents who did, you may notice that there are foods that you enjoy eating that may seem odd or strange or not normal to people who haven't had those experiences. I know when I lived in the UK, my English friends thought it was very strange that I liked to eat peanut butter, and I thought they were equally strange for enjoying Marmite. But these are just different foods we had and hadn't been exposed to throughout our lives. The familiar were normal, the unfamiliar were strange. Norms are the standards or patterns of behavior that are typical or expected within our society. The norms really make up the rules that govern how we behave with one another. Norms help determine what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what's in place, and what's out of place. You're really much more likely to notice the existence of social norms when someone contravenes or violates or transgresses those norms, who doesn't follow the rules. Think about someone who might wear a ball gown to a casual hangout, or wore torn jeans and a tank top to a black tie wedding. That person has contravened the norms, the expected behaviors of that event. In our class, we're going to spend a lot of time thinking about gendered roles and gendered norms, which specifically refer to the patterns of behavior based on our expectations of masculinity and femininity. How are men supposed to act? How are women supposed to act? Whether we agree with those expectations or not, we can agree that they are a powerful social force in our lives. Normativity refers to the process by which we establish and reinforce expected norms, expected behaviors in our society. Throughout our lives, we absorb, produce, and reproduce expectations for each other, whether we're conscious of it or not. How do you react when the person wears the ball gown to the casual hangout? Someone underdressed for a fancy wedding going to be socially ostracized? Our reactions in those situations enforce that behavior is outside of the norm and reinforce those normative expectations that produces the normativity that affects everyone's behavior. We learn about these norms and these expectations through what we're going to talk about as repressive and ideological state apparatuses. Now, these are just really a fancy French philosophical way of thinking about how different types of social forces influence what we consider to be and what we also promote as normal. Repressive state apparatuses refer to government agencies that function, according to French philosopher Althusser, by violence, by imposing punishment or privation in order to enforce their power over what people consider normal. This is generally police, government, prisons, military courts. Now, this can be direct or indirect violence, the infliction of bodily harm, or it can refer to deprivation of resources. If your ability to get a job is affected by the laws in your country because of your sexuality or gender identity, you can't afford to house or feed yourself. Those are the outcome of repressive state apparatuses upholding, in this case, gender and sexual norms. Now, ideological state apparatuses work more indirectly. Repressive state apparatuses have a direct effect on one's physical well-being. Ideological state apparatuses work indirectly to influence what we consider to be or promote as normal. These are things like media, religion, schools, places that affect how we think more than our physical and personal safety. Heteronormativity is a specific type of normativity that we'll be talking a lot in this class, and there are layered expectations to heteronormativity. One, it assumes that everyone is expected to maintain the gender identity assigned them at birth. FAAB, female assigned at birth, and MAAB, male assigned at birth, are acronyms that you may encounter in this class. Heteronormativity also promotes the idea that romantic and sexual attraction always neatly coincide. Heteronormativity also promotes that normal and natural forms of attraction and relationship is between one man and one woman, again, as assigned at birth. Thus, people are assumed to be heterosexual unless proven otherwise, and other forms of sexuality or gender identity are less normal or natural than heterosexuality and cisgender identity. Or identities outside of these categories may be seen as not normal or natural at all. Much of how we understand sexuality and gender in our society comes through the promotion of heteronormativity. Another key assumption that people in Western and particularly US society make is that normal gender identity is essentialized, meaning that gender and sexuality are fixed or unchanging and predetermined from birth. But think about Paige's gender identity and how fluid or changeable that was. Or think about people in your own lives who struggled with their sexual identity. More and more people are coming out more than once because they realize that their initial understanding of their sexuality may have changed. Identity essentialism ignores this experience or labels it abnormal. In the next lecture video, I'll explore how identities, behaviors, and attributes come to be understood and labeled as abnormal through taboos and social stigma.